Hey guys, tonight we begin not with a scholar's lecture or a hero's victory, but with something far more unsettling and raw, the breaking point of a human soul. Because believe it or not, trying to outrun your own past in the year 600 was somehow even more terrifying than the weight of our modern day regrets. We're traveling back to a time of blood debts, desert hermits, and the harsh laws of the sand, where a man's reputation wasn't measured in likes or followers, but in the notches on his blade. From the silent, jagged peaks of the Hedges to a desperate crawl through the great Food, we're looking at a journey that wasn't just about travel, but about whether a heart turned to stone can ever truly beat again. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The sun hung low over the jagged black peaks of the Hedges, casting shadows that looked like long, dark fingers reaching across the dunes. I stood there, a man whose name had been forgotten, replaced only by the terror I carried in my grip. My hands were not my own. They were stained with the copper scent of life fluid that the sand had long ago swallowed. 99 times I had let the steel of my curved dagger taste the warmth of a human throat. 99 times I had watched the light leave a pair of eyes, extinguished like a candle in a sudden desert gale. One wore a cloak of heavy, unwashed camel wool, dark as the soot of a campfire, and my beard was matted with the dust of 1,000 miles of running. Around my waist, a leather belt held the weight of my sins, and every step I took felt as though I were dragging the corpses of the nearly 100 men behind me. The wind howled through the acacia thorns, sounding like the collective scream of the widows I had made in the encampments of the north. I could no longer sleep. When I closed my eyes, the stars above looked like the cold, judging eyes of those I had sent to the dust. I needed to know if the heavens could ever be closed to a man like me, or if there was a crack in the sky through which a murderer could crawl. I heard whispers in the marketplace of a man who lived in the high limestone cliffs, a hermit who had turned his back on the world to face only the Creator. I climbed the treacherous paths where the goats fear to tread, my sandals scuffing against the white rock. I found him sitting in the mouth of a narrow cave, his skin parched like a dried date, his eyes clouded with age but bright with a terrifying purity. He sat upon a simple mat of woven palm fronds, a clay jug of water by his side. The air in the cave was cool and smelled of damp earth and ancient silence. I stood in the entrance, blocking the light, a silhouette of violence against the burning afternoon sun. "I have killed 99 souls," I barked, my voice raspy and unused to anything but commands and curses. "Is there a path of return for me? Can the red be washed from my soul until it is white as the clouds over the Red Sea?" The hermit did not flinch. He looked at my blood-crusted fingernails, at the notch in my blade, and at the darkness that pooled in the hollows of my cheeks. He shook his head, his face contorting in a mask of pious horror. 99? He whispered, his voice trembling like a leaf in the Khamsin wind. "You have defied the sanctity of life until the earth itself groans under your feet. No, there is no repentance for a monster. The gates of mercy are barred with iron, and the fire is your only inheritance." In that moment, a familiar heat rose in my chest, the old, bitter fire that had claimed 99 lives before. If the heavens were closed, I would fill the cup to the brim. I drew my blade, a flash of silver in the dim cave, and with one swift stroke, I made him the 100th. I left him there on his palm mat, his white beard turning crimson, and walked back out into the blinding, unforgiving light. The number burned in my mind like a brand on a stray camel's flank. 100. A century of souls extinguished by my lone hand. I descended from the hermit's cave, the silver of my blade now dulled by the cooling life of a man who had known only prayer. The desert was no longer just a place of sand and stone. It had become a hall of mirrors, every shimmering heat haze reflecting the faces of the men I had cut down. I walked through the valley of dry bones, where the sun bleached the earth until it was the color of a shroud. My water skin was empty, flaccid, and dry against my hip, mimicking the hollowness within my own ribs. I found myself in a small village where the date palms leaned tiredly against the mud brick walls. The people there moved like shadows, sensing the predatory aura that clung to me like the stench of a predator. I sought not gold or silver, for what use is wealth to a man whose soul is a parched well? I sought only the answer that the hermit had denied me with his final breath. In the center of the village stood a house of sun-dried brick, its heavy wooden door carved with patterns of vines and geometry. They told me a scholar dwelt here, a man who did not hide in caves but lived among the people, his mind a vast library of the ancient ways and the new light. I entered without knocking, the dust of the road trailing behind my heavy footsteps. The room was lined with leather-bound scrolls and jars of black ink that smelled of cedar and gumnut. The scholar sat upon a raised platform covered in a thick, colorful rug from the lands of the East. He was a man of girth and gravity, his white turban wrapped neatly, his hands clean and smelling of rosewater. He did not recoil when he saw the dried blood on my sleeves. He looked into my eyes not with the judgment of a victim, but with the curiosity of a physician looking at a festering wound. I spoke the truth of my 100 crimes, my voice a low growl that seemed to vibrate the very jars of ink on his shelves. 100 men, the scholar mused, stroking his silvered beard with a slow, rhythmic motion. A heavy burden for a single back to carry across the bridge of life. He did not scream. He did not cast me out into the burning noon. Instead, he leaned forward, the light from a small oil lamp flickering in his dark pupils. Who am I to stand between a servant and his master? He asked, his voice like the steady flow of a hidden spring. The door to mercy is wider than the distance between the rising and the setting sun. But listen well, traveler. You cannot heal in the same place you became sick. This village, these people, they are the soil in which your darkness grew. To the north, across the great Nephod, lies a land called the Garden of the Righteous. There men worship the one with hearts as clear as polished glass. Go there, join your forehead to the dust with theirs. Do not look back at the trail of blood you have left, for the wind of sincere change will bury it beneath the dunes. I left before the first light of the Fajr could touch the minarets of the distant city. I took nothing but a staff of sturdy olive wood and a single loaf of barley bread wrapped in a rough cloth. The scholar's words were the only map I possessed. As I walked out of the village of my sins, the air felt thick, as if the very atmosphere was trying to hold me back, reminding me of every debt I owed the earth. The sky was a deep, bruised purple, transitioning into a pale gold at the edge of the world. I turned my face toward the North Star, my eyes fixed on the horizon where the sand met the infinite blue. My heart, which had been a cold stone for 40 years, began to throb with a strange, painful heat, not the heat of anger, but the heat of a thawing winter. Every step was a battle against the gravity of my past. I felt the invisible ghosts of the 100 men pulling at my heels, whispering that a wolf could never become a lamb. The great Nephah desert rose up to meet me like a golden ocean frozen in time. The dunes were mountains of shifting fire, and the wind carried the singing sands, a low, ominous hum that drove lesser men to madness. My sandals began to fall apart, the leather straps snapping against the heat of the flint-covered plains. My feet bled, leaving small, dark blossoms on the white-hot earth, a tithe paid to the land for the blood I had stolen from others. The sun became a relentless eye, watching my every stagger, my every gasp for air. I saw mirages of the men I killed. They stood on the crests of the dunes, holding out bowls of cool water that turned to dust as I reached for them. I did not stop. I crawled when I could no longer walk, my fingernails digging into the scorching grit. I was no longer a warrior. I was a beggar at the gates of the universe, stripped of my pride, my weapons, and my name. On the third day, under a sun that turned the sky into a sheet of white iron, my strength finally betrayed me. I fell in the shadow of a lone, gnarled tamarisk tree, its roots clutching at the dry earth like the hands of a drowning man. I was exactly halfway between the land of my crimes and the land of my hope. My lungs felt as though they were filled with hot coals, and my vision began to fracture into shards of light and shadow. I looked toward the north, toward the garden of the righteous, and saw only a blur of green in the distance, perhaps a mirage, or perhaps the promise the scholar had given me. I reached out one trembling hand, dragging my body forward just a few more inches, my chest heaving against the burning sand. I felt a sudden, profound coldness beginning at my toes and moving upward, a stillness that was different from the sleep of the exhausted. The desert grew silent. Even the wind held its breath as the moment of my accounting arrived. The shadow of the tamarisk tree lengthened, but I could no longer feel the cooling touch of the evening. My face was pressed into the grit, the sharp grains of sand drawing the last of my strength from my pores. I felt the pulse in my neck slow to the rhythm of a dying drum, a soft thud-thud that echoed the fading hoofbeats of a distant caravan. With a final, agonizing heave of my shoulders, I threw my weight forward, my chest sliding over a jagged stone, gaining one last handspan of distance toward the north. My fingers curled into the earth, clutching the desert as if I could pull the land of the righteous toward me. Then the light in my eyes dimmed to a single pinpoint star before vanishing into a velvet blackness. My heart gave its final shudder, and the 100th killer was no more. I lay there, a broken vessel of clay in the vast, silent cathedral of the dunes. My journey ended in the middle of nowhere. Suddenly the silence of the desert was shattered by the sound of 1,000 rushing winds. From the swirling dust of the south, the angels of punishment descended like a storm of obsidian and smoke. Their wings were made of tattered shadows, and their eyes were like the glowing embers of a forge. They carried chains of red-hot iron that clanked with the sound of 1,000 prison doors slamming shut. They hovered over my cooling corpse, their faces twisted in righteous fury. "He is ours," they hissed, their voices like the crackling of dry thorns in a fire. "He has spilled the life fluid of 100 souls. His heart is a charred ruin, and his hands are dyed in a crimson that no ocean can wash away. He belongs to the pit, to the place where the sun never shines and the thirst never ends. Reached out their talons to bind my spirit in the heavy links of my own transgressions. But before the chains could touch my soul, the sky to the north split open, and a light more brilliant than the noonday sun poured onto the sands. The angels of mercy descended, their forms woven from the purest white silk and the golden rays of the morning star. Their wings were vast and soft as the down of a dove, smelling of musk and the first rain after a long drought. They stood between my body and the shadows, their presence pushing back the darkness until the desert glowed like a field of pearls. "Stay your hands," the leader of the light-bearers commanded, his voice like the ringing of a silver bell in a quiet valley. This man died in the act of turning. He left behind the land of his filth and set his face toward the garden of the righteous. He was a migrant in the path of the Creator, and his last breath was a plea for the peace he never gave to others. The two hosts stood locked in a celestial stalemate over my silent form, the air vibrating with the tension of the highest law. The desert became a court of cosmic justice. The black-winged spirits pointed to my blood-stained past, while the white-winged protectors pointed to my final, desperate crawl. To settle the dispute, a voice spoke not from the clouds, but from the very heart of the silence. It was the command that governs the stars and the ants alike. "Measure the earth," the command echoed through the valleys of the Hijaz. "Measure the distance between the place of his crimes and the place of his destination. To whichever land he is closer, that is where his soul shall be tethered for eternity." The angels produced a cord of celestial light, a measuring line that stretched across the dunes and the rocky outcrops. The angels of punishment moved toward the south, counting every mile of my 100 murders, while the angels of mercy moved toward the north, measuring the path toward the scholar's promise. As the measuring began, a miracle occurred that no human eye could see. The earth itself, the ancient, sun-scorched soil of the Hijaz, heard the decree of its maker, the land of the south, the land of blood. The hermit's cave and the 100 graves was commanded to stretch, its miles becoming leagues, its valleys widening like a yawning mouth. And the land of the north, the land of the garden, the place of prayer and the scent of jasmine, was commanded to shrink, the mountains folding like a merchant's cloth and the dunes pulling together like a closing hand. I lay there, a small point of dust between two shifting worlds. The very geography of the world was altered for the sake of a single broken man who had decided to change. The sand beneath my chest rippled like water, carrying my body closer to the light even as I lay in the stillness of death. The angels met at the point of the measurement. The cord of light was taut. They looked down at the markers in the sand. By the width of a single hand, the very distance I had crawled in my final gasp, I was closer to the land of the righteous. The angels of punishment recoiled, their smoke wings dissolving into the shadows of the rocks, their chains clattering into nothingness. The angels of mercy knelt beside my body, their faces glowing with a joy that filled the desert air with the fragrance of 1,000 blooming oases. They lifted my spirit with hands as gentle as the evening breeze, wrapping me in a shroud of celestial light that felt like the embrace of a mother. My 100 sins were buried beneath the shifting sands of the Nephid, forgotten by the wind and forgiven by the heavens. As the first light of a new day touched the horizon, I was carried toward the garden, a man who had died a murderer but woke as a son of peace.